Welcome to the deep dive. We take the material you send us, dive into it, and pull out the key insights. Basically, it's your shortcut to getting up to speed.
And today, we're looking at something really interesting about the Gaia space mission. Specifically, its galaxy spotting abilities based on a document a listener shared.
Exactly. So our mission today is figuring out how Gaia, which, let's remember, was mostly built to map our galaxy, the Milky Way, how it also manages to survey super distant galaxies and quasars.
Yeah, it's quite a story. We'll dig into what they've found so far and what it tells us about the bigger universe out there.
It really is kind of mind-bending, isn't it?
Mm.
A tool designed for one thing ends up giving us this whole other perspective.
It is. And look, some of this stuff gets technical, but we'll aim to make it, easy to follow and hopefully uncover some pretty cool facts along the way.
Okay, let's jump in. So Gaia's main gig, its primary objective, is mapping Milky Way stars, right? Like position, distance, movement, the whole shebang.
Precisely. An unprecedented stellar census of our galaxy. That's job number one.
But as it's scanning the sky, just doing its thing, it inevitably picks up other objects that just sort of drift into view.
Exactly. Unexpected guests, as you put it earlier. Things like asteroids in our solar system, actually over 150,000 of them,
Wow.
and more than 500,000 quasars, too. And the key thing is, from Gaia's perspective, these often just look like stars, tiny points of light.
Ah, okay. So the initial detection doesn't really know if it's a nearby star or some incredibly distant quasar. It just sees a dot.
Pretty much, yeah. At that first onboard detection stage, it just flags something bright enough.
Now, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. Apparently, way back, like late 90s, they realized Gaia might also be able to spot faint, distant galaxies.
That's right. It wasn't the original plan, but they figured out that with some tweaks to how it operated on board, they could potentially detect these compact galaxies, too.
And there was a strong scientific reason to actually try and do that.
Oh, definitely. Once they saw the possibility, the science case was compelling. I mean, the chance to get data on objects way beyond the Milky Way, even if it wasn't the core mission, was just too good to ignore.
Okay, but how does that even work? If the detectors, the CCD pixels, are mostly just looking at empty space, even when pointed at faint stuff,
Yeah.
how do you find a faint galaxy?
That's a great question, and it's central to how Gaia operates. You can't just read out every single pixel all the time. It'd be way too much data, mostly noise.
Right, information overload.
Exactly. So Gaia uses these onboard sky mappers. They do a quick scan, and if they spot something above a certain brightness level, a signal-to-noise threshold, then only a small window of pixels around that detection gets fully read out and sent back home.
Ah, like a trigger. Only record when something interesting flies by.
Precisely. It filters out the vast emptiness.
But galaxies aren't just points, are they? They're fuzzy, spread out things. Their brightness changes across them. That sounds, well, tricky for this point source detection approach.
It absolutely was. Optimizing this whole process for extended objects, things with faint, varying surface brightness, that was a major challenge.
Yeah.
The paper mentions folks like Eric Hug, Mattia Beccari, Frederick Arnoux, Leonard Lindegren. They did crucial work on this.
So what did they have to figure out? What were the key adjustments?
Well, there were basically three main things to tune. First, how big an area do you use to measure the galaxy's brightness versus the background sky?
Okay.
Second, how big should the detection window itself be? And what signal-to-noise cutoff do you use to make sure you're catching real things, not just noise or, very faint stars?
Makes sense.
And third, designing a specific sampling scheme, how you actually measure the light within that window. It had to balance getting sharp details, the resolution, against the noise inherent in the detectors, and crucially, the amount of data you could actually downlink.
Ah, the classic trade-off again. Detail versus noise versus data limits. It's always something.
Always. The document gives an example like a typical galaxy of magnitude 17. It would only be detected maybe 60% of the time it passed through the view.
Only 60%. Wow.
Yeah. So over a 5-year mission, that might mean about 50 detections in total, assuming it met the criteria, like a signal to noise over 4 within a 2x2 arc-second box.
That really highlights the difficulty. It's not guaranteed you'll see it every time.
Not at all. And to get a better handle on what they might see, they developed a statistical model sort of predicting the typical numbers, sizes, and brightness of faint galaxies out there.
And what did that model suggest? How many are they hoping for?
It estimated maybe around 3 million galaxies brighter than a certain limit, mostly away from the crowded plane of the Milky Way, more than 15 degrees latitude, where the view is clearer.
3 million. That's still a huge number. But you also mentioned the goal wasn't necessarily to survey all of them.
Right. The aim wasn't a complete census. It was more focused on creating a highly reliable multicolor catalog, one that even pushed into those tricky lower galactic latitudes. And crucially, getting high-resolution images about 0.18 arc seconds, which is pretty sharp for the galaxies bright enough to be resolved well.
So quality over sheer quantity, especially in tough areas. And what were the big scientific questions they wanted to tackle with this specific catalog?
Two main things. First, analyzing the light distribution, the photometric structure in the central bits of tens of thousands of these well-resolved galaxies. Getting that kind of detail was new.
Okay, looking deep into galaxy cores.
Yep. And second, using these galaxies to map out the large-scale structure of the nearby universe. Tracing the filaments and walls of the cosmic web, understanding the supergalactic plane better.
That's amazing, using individual galaxy details to paint this enormous cosmic picture. Okay, so we have the onboard detection, the tricky sampling. What happens when the data gets back to Earth? Who figures it all out?
That falls to a specific group within the big Gaia Data Processing Consortium, a Coordination Unit 4. They're the Extended Objects team.
Right.
Their job is to classify these detections, confirm they are galaxies, measure their shapes, their morphology, and they also look at things flagged as quasars to see if they can spot the host galaxy hiding underneath the bright quasar light.
So they're really digging into the details, not just, yep, it's a blob, but what kind of blob is it?
Exactly.
Now, the document mentions Data Release 3, DR3, that came out relatively recently. What did that release tell us specifically about galaxies and quasars from Gaia?
Okay, so the DR3 results, described by Ducourant and colleagues, use this really sophisticated analysis pipeline. They essentially fit surface brightness profiles to the Gaia data.
How do they do that?
It's clever because Gaia scans across objects. It gets sort of 1D slices of light. So they built a massive library of simulated 2D galaxy images, calculated what those 1D scans would look like, and then matched those simulations to the actual 1D Gaia observations to reconstruct the likely 2D shape.
Wow, okay. So fitting models to the scan data. And what about the quasars in DR3?
Well, for DR3, the starting list of quasars came from existing catalogs, so the sky coverage wasn't perfectly uniform. It depended on previous surveys.
Right.
Their model basically treated a quasar as having two potential parts. A super bright point-like center. They modeled that with a tiny fixed size, like 39 milliarc seconds, reflecting the instrument's view of a point source and then potentially a surrounding host galaxy, which they modeled using a flexible shape profile called a Cirsic profile.
Flexible meaning it could look like different galaxy types.
Exactly. It can represent things from round ellipticals to flatter disks.
And what did they find for the, over 1 million quasars they looked at?
The vast majority, yeah, over 1.03 million, looked purely point-like in Gaia's data. No detectable host galaxy.
Okay.
But for about 6%, that's still around 64,000 objects, they did detect a host galaxy signature.
64,000. That's not insignificant.
Not at all. And for a subset of those, about 16,000, they could actually publish detailed profiles of the host galaxies. And interestingly, the analysis suggested most of those hosts tend to be disk-like, kind of like spiral galaxies.
That's fascinating, seeing the homes of these incredibly luminous quasars.
Mm.
Okay, what about the galaxies themselves in DR3? Not the quasar host, but just regular galaxies.
For those, they started with a more uniform list of about 1.7 million potential extended sources from Gaia itself, excluding the very crowded galactic plane. They tried fitting two main models. One specifically for ellipticals, the Divoculaire profile, and that more general Cirsic profile.
And they got good fits for a lot of them.
Yeah, really robust results for over 900,000 galaxies.
900,000. And what do the shapes of those galaxies tell them? What kind is Gaia mostly seeing?
Well, looking at the distribution of the Cirsic index, that number that describes the profile shape, it became pretty clear that Gaia is predominantly detecting elliptical galaxies, or at least the bright central bulge parts of galaxies. Very few showed clear disk-like profiles.
Which, thinking back, makes sense with the detection method, right? It's biased towards those brighter, more compact central regions.
Exactly. It struggles more with faint, spread-out disks. The contrast between a bright bulge and the fainter surrounding structure is key. The document even shows some plots you can see, the brightness and color distributions, and the sizes and shapes they measured for the galaxies. It gives you a real feel for the data.
Yeah, visualizing it helps.
Hmm.
So DR3 gave us this huge catalog, mostly ellipticals, plus host galaxies for thousands of quasars. What's next? What about data release for DR4?
DR4 promises to be a big step up. For starters, the number of times Gaia observes each object, the number of transits will essentially double compared to DR3.
Now, all the observations.
Yep, which means much better data quality, better angular coverage for reconstructing shapes. And they expect the starting lists of potential galaxies and quasars to be at least twice as large as well.
Wow. So potentially millions more objects.
Potentially, yes. And the quality of those input lists should be better too, because the processing team, that Coordination Unit 4, will have refined their classification methods even further.
So more data, and better initial identification. It sounds like we're just scratching the surface.
I think so. The paper emphasizes the promise of the present results. The sheer numbers are staggering, and the profile fitting seems really robust. The detailed science interpretation, well, that's going to keep astronomers busy for a long time.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Gaia, built for mapping our Milky Way, turns out to be this incredible surveyor of the distant universe, too.
Yep, picking up millions of galaxies and quasars, almost as a side project, though a very valuable one.
We talked about the clever but challenging ways it has to detect these faint, fuzzy objects, filtering out the noise and focusing on tiny windows of the sky.
Right, optimizing for things it wasn't initially designed perfectly for.
And the first big release of this data, DR3, already shows it's finding mostly elliptical-type galaxies, or galactic bulges, and has even given us views of the host galaxies for tens of thousands of quasars, many looking disk-like.
It's a remarkable data set demonstrating how these big space missions can yield completely unexpected science. It gives us this unique view on the large-scale structure, the nature of galaxies, the environments of quasars.
It really does, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? If Gaia, which had these hurdles for observing extended objects, is finding all this, what other completely unforeseen discoveries might future, even more capable, surveys uncover? What else is hiding out there that we haven't even thought to look for yet?
That's the exciting part about exploration, isn't it? The potential for pure discovery.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for diving into this with us.